The COVID pandemic cost the lives of over 200,000 people in the UK.
Yeah, okay, ready, steady, go.
And took a terrible toll on millions more.
Sorry.
But the way the government gave out contracts for PPE and testing meant that for a select few, the story was very different.
Some people could make life-enhancing amounts of money by making a profit on really quite basic PPE.
Michelle Mone has become notorious for the PPE contracts she was involved with.
That cash is not my cash, it's not my children's cash.
But others made far more from the taxpayer.
The Michelle Mone case is just the tip of the iceberg. There are far more important cases that we have yet properly to look at.
This is the untold story of how the government went from having almost no stocks of PPE to having more than could ever possibly be used.
We're talking about probably the biggest government misspending scandal in the UK of all time.
And the true scale of this multi-billion-pound scandal is only now coming to light.
We spent well over £1 billion storing it, and we're spending millions of pounds incinerating it.
We investigate how some companies with little or no track record in supplying PPE or medical tests were given massive contracts and made a killing from COVID.
The government essentially created a system for people with political connections to be able to profit from government contracts.
Very few companies in British history have made more money more quickly.
Now largely unnoticed, the UK's most costly public inquiry is set to continue for at least another year.
We didn't know at the time what we needed to do.
But with access to hundreds of previously secret documents, emails and records, we ask, who was responsible?
For the most part, politicians have not really had to face any accountability for their role in this.
There are still some very serious questions to answer for the government of the day, for the officials leading the procurement, and for those who took advantage and made their millions living very lavish lifestyles.
Coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades. I urge you to stay at home, protect our NHS, and save lives.
On the 23rd of March 2020, the country went into lockdown. The UK was woefully unprepared for the pandemic.
No hospital was ready in the UK because we hadn't adequately prepared stockpiles of personal protective equipment.
Newspapers and TV quickly filled with images of doctors and nurses having to make their own PPE out of bin bags.
This way, this way, this way, this way.
At the beginning, the shortages of PPE were absolutely terrifying. The scale of the dying was like nothing any of us had ever experienced before. There was a desperate scramble for PPE, and every hospital started rationing.
There is a massive effort going on to ensure that we have adequate supplies of PPE equipment, not just now, but throughout the outbreak.
There is a huge international demand for PPE and a global squeeze on supply.
With the world scrambling to buy PPE and prices going up fast, the existing NHS procurement team was struggling. Boris Johnson set up a new procurement unit run by Matt Hancock's Department of Health, with many of its staff coming from Michael Gove's Cabinet Office.
Our PPE sourcing unit is securing new supply lines from across the world.
The government put out public appeals to help source PPE from new suppliers, and the normal tender and competition rules were suspended. Under pressure to respond quickly, a secret high-priority VIP lane was also set up by civil servants to deal with credible offers coming via ministers, MPs or senior officials.
I am determined to get people the PPE that they need.
We started to look at who was getting a lot of this work, who was supplying the PPE. When you looked at those companies, you thought, who on earth are they?
Contracts worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, vast sums of money, were being handed to companies with little or no experience providing PPE, or companies that had only just been established.
It was all these weird and wonderful companies that had come from nowhere.
Some of these companies had other relevant experience, but among the unlikely businesses fast-tracked to receive public money were a brand new company linked to a bra manufacturer getting contracts for £203 million, a dog food manufacturer brokering contracts for £258 million, and an office design company getting contracts for £679 million.
Whenever you see contracts going to strange suppliers, the immediate question you ask yourself is, why? We started to dig into who those suppliers of PPE really were, and we found many of these contracts turned out to have important political connections.
One of these, PPE MedPro, was owned by Doug Barrowman, husband of Baroness Michelle Mone, a Conservative peer best known for her Ultimo lingerie empire. MedPro, set up during the first lockdown, is perhaps the most notorious of the brand new PPE companies, but there were many others.
Companies with no previous experience in providing PPE, but with a political connection, mopping up millions of pounds worth of contracts. It couldn't just be a coincidence.
Then, in October 2020, a whistleblower inside government leaked damning evidence to the campaign group Good Law Project.
We were sent a bunch of documents, and those documents described the existence of what they referred to as a VIP loan. If you were a VIP, your contract was sent to a special team for special handling. One of the documents talks about high-profile contacts requiring a rapid response. We expected to find political connections, and we did find political connections. What we didn't expect was that government would just set it out nakedly on the page. Special treatment for very important people.
John was working in the Department of Health's PPE procurement team at the time.
We became aware of the VIP lane through this big database, showing all the details of the companies, what they're actually going to be able to sell, what prices they were going to be able to do, who were the people in charge, and then there was a little tick box there that said VIP, tick yes or no.
If the high priority lane had been for PPE experts, this would have been understandable, but it became clear that wasn't relevant. An email sent to ministerial offices revealed that the VIP lane, as it was also called, was for those with the right connections. The deputy director of the PPE unit says specifically in one email,
VIP route is facing a backlog and is for MPs who can make life painful and shout loudly.
The vast majority of others had to go through the public online portal or the existing NHS supply chain. But for Baroness Mone, these routes weren't needed.
It became apparent that Michelle Mone had been lobbying very intensively for PPE MedPro to get these contracts. She'd contacted Michael Gove, trying to make sure that PPE MedPro got a buy-in.
He said that she should contact this other Conservative member of the House of Lords called Lord Agnew.
Theodore Agnew is a former Tory donor and life peer. In 2020, as COVID first hit the UK, he came to the Cabinet Office to work on sourcing ventilators under Michael Gove.
So she directly contacted Lord Agnew, copying in Michael Gove, offering to supply PPE.
Dear Theodore, I hope this email finds you well. Michael Gove has asked me to urgently contact you.
Michelle, thank you for your kind offer. I'm forwarding this into the appropriate PPE workstream with the Department of Health.
Lord Agnew's private secretary put Mone's PPE MedPro offer onto the VIP lane, and just 18 days after it was created, the company got its first contract for £81 million. A month later, it got a further contract for £122 million. In total, over £200 million, despite having no previous experience of sourcing PPE. But others with connections to the Conservative Party were getting even bigger contracts. And once again, Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove was involved.
We call it Think, Create, Make.
Unispace is an Australian company. Its main business was office design. It wasn't a health equipment company at all, but it was one of these companies that stepped in when the pandemic offered an opportunity.
The founders of Unispace, Gareth and Charles Hales, are the sons of Bruce Hales. He is the global leader of the Plymouth Brethren, which has links with the Conservative Party.
The Plymouth Brethren are a Christian sect with about 50,000 members around the globe. Just one day after the country went into lockdown on the 24th of March, the founders of Unispace reached out to Michael Gove.
Gove's office passed the offer on to Hancock's office, and in April, Unispace went on to the VIP lane.
And within a month, this company with no previous experience providing PPE was awarded their first contract worth £239 million.
Michael Gove says he was not involved in making decisions about contracts, and the government said that ministers and MPs simply forwarded promising offers to civil servants. Following Gove's introduction, Unispace went on to get a total of £679 million worth of PPE contracts, the most any single company obtained. In all, at least 52 companies were awarded contracts via the high priority lane, worth a total of £4.2 billion. Another company that benefited is SG Recruitment.
It's a real essential VIP lane story because we're talking about very, very high up Tory grandee, very well connected people.
A shareholder and director of their Jersey-based parent company was Peter Selwyn Gummer, Lord Chadlington, another Tory grandee.
He was a very, very well connected senior Conservative member of the House of Lords. He's quite close to David Cameron.
Lord Chadlington texted Cameron, who put him in touch with his old friend from Oxford, Andrew Feldman.
Feldman of L Street, do you swear by Almighty God?
Lord Feldman, a former Tory chairman, had been brought into the Department of Health to advise on PPE procurement. He referred SG Recruitment onto the high priority lane.
And within a week, they've got the first contract, which was worth £24 million.
A month later, despite being a small loss-making healthcare recruitment agency with no previous experience providing PPE, the company was given a second contract, worth a further £26 million. A total of £50 million in a matter of weeks.
There's absolutely no doubt that being in this lane gave the suppliers in it, very, very big leg up into getting these contracts.
The Conservative government later said the high priority lane was open to referrals from politicians of all parties. But almost half the VIPs who went on to get contracts were referred or passed on to the officials by Tory MPs or ministers. According to the government's VIP list, not a single company referred by politicians from any other party was given a contract. And VIPs were 10 times more likely to get a contract than those who went through the normal Department of Health channels.
You were seeing all these VIPs getting contracts. All the other companies that I was dealing with didn't get any contracts at all. It was very frustrating because you've done a lot of the background work, taking the time to find out about the companies, seeing who their actual manufacturer was so that we could check that the manufacturer had the capability of producing as many items as they said, and then to always find out that none of your deals have gone through. The VIP lane was obviously the Premiership, and all the rest of the suppliers were in the second division.
The Conservative government later said VIPs may have been more successful in winning contracts because their offers were more promising and the VIP lane was better resourced.
Since the start of the crisis, we've now delivered over 1 billion items of PPE. We've had 8,331 offers of PPE equipment, and we're investigating each and every one of those many leads.
There's also evidence from government emails that because civil servants felt they had to prioritise VIPs, long-established PPE companies without the right political contacts were getting sidelined.
Civil servants had real concerns about it, and that, really good leads could actually be being drowned out in the process.
VIP escalation is obstructing progress of more viable opportunities for larger scalable manufacturers.
Arco is a leading UK supplier of PPE with over 50 years' experience. The company sent 750,000 PPE kits to Sierra Leone during the Ebola epidemic. But when the COVID pandemic arrived, nobody was returning their calls.
Our team in China made sure we had access to product. Our logistics team chartered 10 jumbo jets, and we filled the shed. It was ready to go. We had product on the ground, we had expertise ready to be deployed. We used the government portals, we used the website, we used all of our existing contacts. There would literally be 50 or 60 attempts every day to break through to central government, and we were coming up against a closed door every single time. And I couldn't understand why anyone in charge would choose to ignore the expertise available on tap. So yeah, I was angry, I was frustrated, but I'm not alone in being disappointed because the entire safety industry was not mobilised as the way it should have been.
While some VIPs with no PPE experience at all were getting contracts for hundreds of millions in a matter of days, it took 2 months before Arco was finally asked to supply the Department of Health with £9 million worth of face masks. In the meantime, the company managed to bypass central government and supply NHS trusts direct.
I was speaking to chief medical officers ringing me in tears. We had to do something. So we went round the outside. We supplied all 291 NHS trusts in the UK. We dealt with them on a direct basis. No government contracts, just us and the individual trusts. And actually no guarantee we were going to get paid. But it was the right thing to do, and I'd do it again.
But it wasn't just proven suppliers who lost out. Critics say it was also a disaster for the taxpayer. Whilst many offers were well-intentioned, there are concerns about others.
Normally we have really robust processes for awarding contracts to private companies. Contracts have to be put out for tender. And what happened during the pandemic was that those processes were essentially ripped up and thrown in the bin.
The government used emergency procurement measures to just directly award contracts to companies.
Now there was no competition, which gave these new businesses, or often existing businesses, opportunity to inflate their prices and make huge profits. The pandemic essentially became a gold rush for some business people.
Whilst for most of us, the pandemic was a kind of national tragedy, for a few politically connected people, this was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to make vast fortunes at public expense.
Almost 2 years after the first contracts were signed, a whistleblower sent Good Law Project spreadsheets of prices paid for PPE by the government, so they could compare VIP prices with average prices across the pandemic.
A very angry civil servant, furious at what he'd seen, leaked to us a whole bunch of internal government spreadsheets. And if you look at those spreadsheets, you can see that VIP suppliers were paid on average 80% more than suppliers who came through the normal channels.
One deal, secured by Ianda Capital, raises questions about the prices paid. Ianda is an investment company that was fast-tracked onto the high priority lane following an introduction by Andrew Mills. He was made an advisor to the Board of Trade by then Trade Secretary Sir Liam Fox, and he was also an advisor to the board of Ianda Capital.
I knew he had a lot of experience dealing with the NHS. And I said, look, Andrew, could you make a few calls and find out how the process works?
Inside Whitehall, officials quickly made clear this was a VIP case, though both the company and Andrew Mills say they knew nothing about this. Ayanda had no experience supplying medical equipment, but Mills had previously been involved in managing health procurement, and 14 days after his introduction, Ayanda was given a contract for face and respirator masks worth $252 million.
Civil servants did raise concerns about the Ayanda Capital bid. They thought the price was too high, but despite that, Ayanda Capital secured their contract anyway.
More senior staff later said that though they believed the face masks were marginally more expensive than the government's benchmark average price at the time, the more important respirator masks were cheaper. So the deal securing over 200 million masks was signed off. The government's benchmark was based on the average price paid in the previous 2 weeks. But new analysis, applying that benchmark formula to the leaked spreadsheets, suggests a face mask average of 36p, when Ayanda was paid 59p. And for respirator masks, the benchmark comes out as £1.28, compared to Ayanda's price of £3.10. Ayanda and Mills dispute these comparisons, saying their prices were within the benchmark range used by the government. They say prices were volatile and increasing, and their price was a good, fixed price that secured 3 months' supply. In the end, Andrew Mills' own company was paid £32 million. He says profits were in line with the risks he took and market rates.
Andrew Mills is probably one of the richest beneficiaries of the pandemic in the shortest space of time.
There's also evidence that PPE MedPro, the company linked to Michelle Mone, made a very significant margin on their gowns contract.
I was given by a source the actual contract from the Chinese factory for the gowns that the government paid £122 million for, and they showed that they'd cost them £46 million to buy from the factory.
The company had to pay to buy the PPE, so there was a risk involved, but the profit margins were also impressive.
You know, MedPro made a return on its investment of about realistically, about 30%.
I was leaked a document that was produced by HSBC Bank as part essentially of an internal investigation that showed that at least £65 million had been paid to Doug Barrowman's accounts in the Isle of Man, and that he transferred from that £29 million to an offshore trust that was set up for the benefit of Michelle Mone and her 3 adult children.
I didn't receive that cash. That cash is not my cash. That cash is my husband's cash.
But it seems Unispace, the company majority owned by the Hales brothers, made even more. After the company was VIP'd via Michael Gove, according to the leaked spreadsheets, for full-body hazmat suits, they got more than 3 times the average price charged by other suppliers in the previous 2 weeks, £24 each, rather than £7, suggesting a difference across the contract of £170 million. In November 2022, one of the company's owners, Gareth Hales, reportedly bought a $9 million luxury mansion in Australia.
I felt that we were buying at ridiculous prices, not negotiating enough, not trying to get the best deal. It was just very much, let's buy what we can buy, and it doesn't really matter about the price.
International prices for things had gone up because, you know, when there's a shortage of goods, prices go up.
So there is some mitigation, but I still don't think it excuses how much we overpaid, how much people charged us, and how much the government at the time lost control.
The government's internal audit agency said the VIP prices were not systematically higher and in some cases were lower, but their report has not been published. Based on the spreadsheets leaked to them, Goodlaw Project estimated that VIP lane contracts were inflated by around £900 million compared to the average prices across the pandemic. Enough to train 14,000 new nurses.
There's case after case of some companies charging high prices for goods and almost no pushback from the government to try to ensure that they were getting value for taxpayers' money.
I was disgusted at the amount of money that these companies were making. It was just ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching for them.
Going into this, I was shocked by the scale of the profits, the ease with which they were earned, and the speed with which they were earned.
So I took the risk on attitude here was to be prepared to pay above market value, which normally I would have been pretty aghast at. I was the Minister for Efficiency before I was the Minister responding to COVID, and so I found it quite uncomfortable, but it was necessary to save lives.
We shifted heaven and earth to get 32 billion items of PPE into this country. I'm very proud of what has been achieved.
The Conservative government maintained that contracts were always awarded by the Department of Health
in line with procurement regulations and transparency guidelines to prevent conflicts of interest.
Throughout the first lockdown, doctors and nurses kept reporting problems with faulty PPE used on the front line, though it's not suggested this is linked to the companies named in this film.
Sometimes we would find that the equipment that had been supplied just wasn't up to standard.
I can't count the number of times I went onto a COVID ward and came across PPE that was not fit for purpose. Masks are meant to have a bit on the bridge of the nose that you press down so it tightly fits the shape of your face. Our masks, often they wouldn't have that, so there'd be a gaping hole between your face and the mask. Other times, you tried to put a mask on, but the little loops that you hook around your ears would just ping off onto the floor, so this mask would just fall at your feet. Sometimes the aprons would be so thin, they'd be almost transparent. It was a bit like putting on cheap cling film, and it would just sometimes rip or disintegrate in your hands. I can't emphasise enough how scary it is to be spending a day seeing COVID patients when some of the PPE on the ward is that inadequate.
It is a fact that every single recommendation for the procurement of PPE went through an independent 8-stage process verified by independent civil servants.
In fact, it later came out that this 8-stage process was only set up in May 2020, by which time 46 of 111 PPE contracts on the VIP lane had already been handed out.
Many of the suppliers who came to the VIP lane were not PPE specialists. They'd never done PPE procurement before, so it's hardly surprising that actually they weren't always able to come up with the goods.
To the best of my knowledge, all the equipment we're sending out is of the correct standard.
Analysis in 2022, based on available government figures, suggested that almost 60% by value of the PPE supplied by VIP lane companies was later categorised as not for use in the NHS, though the government has not given details of why.
You would expect some level of error and wastage in emergency procurement. In the non-VIP normal procurement channel, the rate of unusable material was 17%. But when you get to the nearly 60% in the VIP lane of unusable equipment, that's a really staggering level of failure, essentially, which suggests this was just absolutely the wrong way to go around an emergency procurement.
A spokesman for Boris Johnson said,
"We stand by the decision to purchase the items that we did. We were acting in a highly competitive global market."
He also claimed 97% of the PPE was suitable for use. But official figures show that a third of the equipment not passed on to the NHS was either defective or not needed, and 2/3, while functional, was not fit for use in the NHS. Ianda, the company linked to Andrew Mills, supplied over £150 million worth of respirator masks with ear loops. But the government then decided that NHS respirator masks should have full head straps to form a better seal, so the Ianda masks were not used in hospitals. The Department of Health did accept that the contract was fulfilled, and the masks may have been used in care homes, resold or donated. Another, PPE MedPro, a VIP courtesy of Michelle Mone, provided gowns worth £122 million that the government says were unusable. And all of the £24 million worth of gowns supplied by Lord Chadlington's introduction, SG Recruitment, were found to be unusable. The companies all said they complied with contractual specifications.
The deals were rushed through and the due diligence wasn't deep enough, it wasn't thorough enough, and it wasn't professionally enough checked.
Government should have been using very clear contract specifications for PPE to certain medical standards, and a lot of the contracts don't appear to have that in there, or people relying on a single photograph of a gown, wrapped in China as proof that, certain quality controls were being followed, and that seems extraordinary to me.
Another major VIP supplier of unusable PPE was WorldLink Resources.
That dog here really changed our lives. We found him on our...
Their deals were brokered by businesswoman Zoe Lee.
Zoe Lee, before the pandemic struck, sold dog food for a living. But in May, she quickly established a new company brokering PPE deals on behalf of a company called WorldLink Resources, based in Hong Kong.
Zoe Lee then teamed up with Brooks Newmark, a former Tory minister, and he emailed Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary.
Dear Matt, please find below the proposal I wanted to discuss with you.
Matt Hancock's office, within 1 day, forwarded this offer onto the VIP lane team. And just 4 days later, WorldLink Resources secured a PPE contract to provide goggles worth an unbelievable £178 million.
This was followed by another contract for £80 million worth of surgical gowns, a total of over £250 million. But we have discovered that the Department of Health bought enough goggles to last 15 years and a decade's worth of surgical gowns. £106 million worth of WorldLink's PPE was later categorised as unusable by the NHS. Zoe Lee's company, Life Partners, made £17 million worth of profit in its first year. Her lawyers say any problems with the PPE were the responsibility of WorldLink, not Life Partners. In July 2020, Lee bought herself a £7 million stately home in Berkshire, but denied through her lawyers that all her money came from WorldLink, or that undue profits were made off the back of taxpayers. The former Tory whip Brooks Newmark's consultancy saw its capital and reserves go from virtually nothing in 2020 to 2.4 million a year later. In all, 25 out of 51 VIP lane suppliers provided PPE the government decided could not be used in the NHS, costing £1 billion, enough to pay the salaries of 20,000 resident doctors. And even with this much unusable PPE being intercepted before it reached hospitals, unsuitable equipment kept getting to the front line, although there is no evidence that any of this was supplied by the companies named in this film.
It's unacceptable that faulty PPE was making its way through to the front line. Fundamentally, the staff working in the NHS, trying to look after patients, were let down by the government.
We were lambs to the slaughter. We were not protected properly.
Working with patients with infectious diseases, you expect that some staff will inevitably catch that disease, and that's a risk we accept as healthcare workers. But if we'd had proper PPE supplied when we needed it, some of those infections could have been prevented.
I'm absolutely certain that there are NHS doctors and nurses who are not alive today because of poor quality PPE.
Critics say that the way the VIP lane operated led to distortions in the procurement process and also caused major problems for the taxpayer.
We should have bought from people who knew what they were doing, but instead we are paying the price.
This was a system that was completely unique to the UK. We couldn't find any other country in the world that chose to create a VIP lane. This was absolutely flying in the face of all international best practice and essentially throwing the rulebook out of the window.
But as the first lockdown came to an end, the government had already created a second VIP lane.
The lateral flow test market became another gold rush,
where billions and billions of pounds of contracts were being awarded.
When I found out that there was a VIP lane in testing, I just thought, you are kidding. Here we go again.
You can meet other people in the park, but it should be one other person from another household and observing social distancing.
By May 2020, the first lockdown was coming to an end, and the government had come up with a new plan.
We will have a test, track and trace operation that will be world-beating.
Today we formally launch NHS Test and Trace. This is an incredibly important milestone for the country. NHS Test and Trace means we can start to replace the national lockdown with individual isolation.
So which companies were contracted to deliver this world-beating operation?
I started to look at the contracts being published for the Test and Trace programme, and almost immediately I noticed a familiar pattern emerging where huge contracts were being awarded to companies with little or no experience.
One of those was Acora, a medical bedding company owned by the Drake family. Through former Tory Health Secretary Andrew Lansley, Acora were introduced to Lord Bethell, the Tory peer and health minister, working on Test and Trace under Matt Hancock.
The nation is hugely grateful.
He passed them on to the VIP team. The company was given a testing contract for nearly £19 million, although it had no track record in medical diagnostics.
You can't find a better purpose than what we have here at Tanner Pharma Group.
Another company with no previous testing experience, Tanner Pharma, was given contracts totalling £1.4 billion after it contacted a Department of Health official. But even Tanner's £1 billion payday was dwarfed by one secured by a brand new startup.
The biggest winner of COVID contracts was this company called Innova.
Innova appeared from nowhere in March 2020. It was set up by Charles Wang, who did a marketing PhD in Glasgow in the 90s before setting up a private equity firm in California.
Innova got its contract after it reached out to Dominic Cummings, who was Boris Johnson's advisor at the time. And then it was fast-tracked and it got its contract.
Within just 1 hour of receiving Innova's email, Cummings' office had passed it on to senior officials in charge of Test and Trace.
But his involvement didn't end there. He also lobbied Rishi Sunak
to get around what he saw as Whitehall bureaucracy and buy the tests.
This was incredibly effective. Within a couple of months, contracts started flowing to Innova.
By the end of the pandemic, Innova had been paid over £5 billion by the UK government, despite being a brand new company with no track record in supplying medical goods.
Very few companies in British history have made more money more quickly than Innova did in selling lateral flow tests to the government.
Some of the companies winning contracts also seemed to have political connections.
Once I started seeing these connections appear again, you just get this sinking feeling that the government had not learnt the lessons from the previous VIP lane.
Then in May 2021, Good Law Project obtained an email that confirmed their suspicions.
The email revealed that there was a VIP lane for Test and Trace as well.
The civil servant was instructing ministers that they should put fast track in their subject header. This time, the VIP lane was on a much larger scale, where billions and billions of pounds of contracts were being awarded.
Government flat out denied that there was a VIP lane for Test and Trace.
These claims are completely false. There was no high priority lane for testing suppliers.
But we held the emails from senior civil servants describing the VIP lane and Test and Trace. They just lied.
The government eventually admitted there was indeed a VIP lane for Test and Trace, though it said it was not just for referrals from high-ranked individuals, but also where there were shortages or bottlenecks in supply. From the £7.9 billion spent on testing from May 20 to March 21, more than 3/4 of this, £6 billion, went to just 50 VIP lane companies, with Conservative politicians or advisors involved in the referral of or linked to 11 of them. Many of the VIPs did have experience in medical testing, and some were existing suppliers. But the lion's share of the money, £5 billion, went to Innova, the brand new startup, VIP'd via Dominic Cummings,
You're supposed to be more than 2 metres apart.
which had no track record whatsoever.
These are like a pregnancy test.
They are a bit, yeah.
Test and Trace was meant to be the route to freedom, allowing the end of lockdown and the return to normal life.
Hello.
And briefly, over the summer of 2020, things seemed to be looking up. But the optimism was short-lived, and the VIP deals for testing turned out to have similar problems to those for PPE.
This guy is negative.
There was huge controversy for quite a long time around the accuracy of the Innova tests. A lot of people said they were not as accurate as the company was claiming that they were.
Accurate, when used correctly.
One study found that although useful, the Innova tests missed 3 out of 5 infections in people who self-swabbed. A later study found a slightly better result, with only 2 out of 5 infections being missed when self-swabbing, making the test 60% accurate.
60% accuracy in a lateral flow test is absolutely rubbish. It doesn't help you as a doctor because it's not sensitive enough to either rule in or rule out COVID.
I mean, these tests were terrible tests. They had very low levels of accuracy. The US Food and Drug Administration issued the sort of most serious and urgent of its recall notices in respect to these tests. It told consumers to throw them in the bin. Literally, that's what it said. It also said that they believed the test data supplied by Innova may have been falsified. I mean, this is really striking stuff, and yet we kept shoving more and more billions of pounds of our money down Innova's throat. The whole thing is kind of totally mind-blowing.
Innova says that their tests were accurate when used correctly, cost-effective, and met the government's urgent requirements.
Staff didn't trust the lateral flow tests at all because they were just so rubbish at picking up cases of COVID.
Lateral flow tests were less reliable than lab tests, but they gave instant results and were good at identifying the most infectious individuals. But as with PPE, the government significantly overbought COVID tests. In 2023, it admitted it had 1/3 billion unused tests in stock.
We discovered that 126 million COVID tests were unusable, costing almost £250 million. And of the 6 suppliers that we know about, 5 came to us through the VIP lane.
The government did not say why the tests were unusable.
There's your test kit.
There were also issues with the other main form of testing, the PCR test, which had to be sent off to a lab.
Randox Laboratories is a Northern Ireland-based testing company. It actually had a sitting Conservative MP, Owen Paterson, working as a paid advisor. He was earning £100,000 a year in that role.
In January and February 2020, Paterson, a former Tory minister, repeatedly lobbied Matt Hancock on behalf of Randox. And though Randox has never been named as a VIP company, on March the 1st, civil servants confirmed that, along with certain other companies, it had been prioritised for the testing of its product.
So by March, Randox were awarded their first contract worth over £100 million.
The National Audit Office has since said that because the Department of Health did not keep or disclose full records,
it is not possible to provide positive assurance in the normal way, but we have not seen any evidence that the government's contracts with Randox were awarded improperly.
But soon after Test and Trace was launched, issues started to emerge with the company's PCR tests.
Just 4 months after winning their first contract in 2020, officials issued a huge recall. 750,000 tests were sent back.
The government said the recall was only a precautionary measure. The risk to safety was low and test results were not affected. 2 months later, the company got another PCR testing deal worth $328 million, though issues were continuing.
Undercover reporters went into the Randox labs, and what they discovered was shocking.
Samples can get stuck in them. Okay. Sent out to the country, and then they guys who use the cardboard get samples all over them, and nobody wants to. They can.
You change your gloves and all?
Always just spray them down.
Just spray them down.
Randox disputed the findings of the programme.
After the undercover reporting, the Health and Safety Executive visited Randox labs in Northern Ireland, and they were shocked by what they saw. They issued a notice to Randox to take immediate action to clear up the mess.
The Randox labs were subsequently declared COVID compliant, and the company went on to be awarded £300 million worth of further testing contracts. Randox and Owen Paterson say that he played no role in the negotiation or securing of the contracts, and that they were all awarded in full compliance with government procedures of protocols in place at the time. But they weren't the only ones with problems.
The scandal over false negative PCR tests, which wrongly gave thousands of people across the West the all clear.
Another company, Immensa Health, won VIP contracts worth £169 million for COVID testing after going through the public portal.
Within a few weeks of tests arriving at Immensa's labs in Wolverhampton, there were complaints about negligence and bad practices.
The Sun filmed secret footage showing lab workers brawling, sleeping at their desk, playing football and bragging about drinking alcohol whilst at work.
Lots of people in the scientific community knew that the results that the Immensa lab was producing were wrong. And the Welsh Government also was expressing concern about the results, but we just didn't do anything. We let them carry on spending money, we let them carry on delivering these false results.
It was eventually discovered that Immensa were responsible for giving out 39,000 incorrect COVID test results. This led to a huge spike in COVID cases.
And 23 people, according to government's own numbers, lost their lives in consequence.
The government finally took action.
All COVID testing at a privately run lab in Wolverhampton has been suspended.
And as with PPE a few months earlier, the lack of competitive tendering meant that companies, including those on the VIP lane, were at a significant advantage with respect to pricing.
The government had no kind of power in the negotiations. There was no competition.
So if you were lucky enough to be in the testing market already, the profits that testing companies made, the ones that were in early in particular, were absolutely huge.
One company, Nationwide Pathology, introduced by Tory MP Alberto Costa, made $40 million over the pandemic, a profit margin of 45%. SureScreen Diagnostics, referred by MP and former Conservative Minister Liam Fox, made $67 million, also a profit margin of 45%. And Primer Design, a VIP and existing supplier that repeatedly contacted Health Minister Lord Bethell, made $178 million in 2020, a profit margin of 65%.
These are completely unprecedented profits for goods like this. This is 50% profit margins. Some companies were reporting 60%. This is an absolute bonfire of profits.
Randox Laboratories was given contracts totalling over £750 million across the pandemic, following the lobbying efforts of Conservative MP Owen Paterson.
Randox made about $300 million during the pandemic in profits, at margins around the 40% mark, which is absolutely unheard of before or since.
I mean, these are profit margins that they couldn't even dream of in normal times.
The company says it received £470 million under its contracts. Its profits reflect the risks and challenges in the early pandemic and its investment. Its prices fell when markets stabilised, and it provided value for money. And Tanner Pharma, which we can reveal was also on the VIP lane, went from a pre-pandemic loss of £500,000 to a cumulative profit of £193 million during the pandemic.
And it paid its owner Banksbourne £148 million in dividends. That's not a bad payday from the British taxpayer.
But Innova, the company fast-tracked via Dominic Cummings, was by far the biggest winner. It made a profit of £1.5 billion, despite having no experience whatsoever of medical testing.
The government was so desperate to get its hands on these rapid tests that they massively overpaid for them.
Charles Huang, the private equity investor behind Innova, seen here in a documentary extolling his achievements, is alleged in a legal claim by his former business partners to have taken at least $1 billion of Innova's profits for his own use, including spending $70 million on private jets, buying an $18 million mansion in LA, and multiple homes for his mistresses. He denies the allegations.
I've heard the argument so many times that the government had to act in this way in order to move quickly and save lives, but the evidence that we now have shows that that just doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
A pandemic was always going to be expensive, but we didn't need to turn it into the profiteers charter that we did and that we're now paying the price for.
Obviously, I cared about how much money we were spending, but I thought that that was second order to stopping the pandemic and keeping people alive.
We spent about 3 times as much on test and trace as we spent on PPE. And we know that test and trace made no discernible difference.
Over 2 years, the test and trace programme cost around £37 billion, enough to pay for 100 new hospitals or 1,200 new schools. The Conservative government claimed test and trace was a success, reducing transmission by at least 10%. But the Public Accounts Committee described the cost as unimaginable and said the programme failed to deliver on its central promise of avoiding another lockdown.
The virus is spreading even faster than the reasonable worst-case scenario. And so now is the time to take action because there is no alternative.
The UK plunged into a second lockdown in November 2020. But the spending didn't end with the failure of test and trace.
We spent well over £1 billion storing it, and we're spending millions of pounds incinerating it.
Billions of pounds of public money wasted and literally going up in smoke.
Absolutely fine. Can barely feel it.
Almost 2 years after the first lockdown, the success of the COVID vaccines meant it was mission accomplished in the battle against COVID.
We will remove all remaining domestic restrictions in law.
But though the pandemic was over, the spending continued. Vast quantities of PPE, much of it bought at significantly inflated prices, now had to be either stored or destroyed.
So one of the startling things about the UK's response, if you compare it to its international peers, is just the scale of over-ordering of PPE. We spent far more than any other European country. Most of them stopped buying after a couple of months. The UK kept going and going like a runaway train.
We can reveal that confidential government briefing papers say the intention was to buy just 4 months' worth of PPE. But we have found the government went on to stockpile 5 years' worth, and in one category, 15 years' worth. In all, the UK spent around £15 billion on PPE, whereas according to one analysis, every other country in Europe spent less than £3 billion, though this figure was disputed at the inquiry.
The UK's approach seems to be buy as much as we possibly can. We're not quite sure how much we need, but let's ensure that we've built up this massive stockpile and damn the consequences in terms of cost or the quality of the materials that we bought.
We had so much stock, but we were still buying when we knew that we didn't need any more.
The problem with having all this extra PPE was that we weren't able to warehouse it, and that it was just getting left at the docks.
In late 2020, something like 11,000 shipping containers were blocking ports across the country. Felixstowe Port almost ground to a halt.
Mountains of shipping containers began popping up around the country.
We knew we had too much PPE. It was there on the docks in China, and we were trying to stop it coming over from China.
By March 22, with the pandemic officially over, the UK had 300 pieces of unused PPE for every person in the country, 20.6 billion items, at a cost to the taxpayer of almost £10 billion.
The oversupply was rather larger than I anticipated, but it is better to have more, to err on the side of more supply, because if you err on the side of less, then you run out, and we got very close to that.
Some of this was unusable, but a lot of it was simply the result of significant over-ordering, and now someone had to be paid to store it.
Companies that were previously hired to supply PPE and deliver PPE were now being rewarded again by being given huge contracts to store surplus stocks of PPE.
The biggest beneficiary was Uniserv, the UK's largest privately owned logistics and freight management company.
We were contacted by the DHSC on Mothering Sunday, the 22nd of March last year, initially to urgently move ventilators out of China into the UK. Prior to that, we hadn't spoken to the DHSC, we hadn't sold into government.
Had you procured PPE before the pandemic?
We haven't procured PPE before, no. We told the DHSC that at the beginning.
Within 9 days, the company was given a £500 million contract to provide freight services for PPE and medical equipment. It was then referred to the VIP lane by Lord Agnew in the Cabinet Office and secured further contracts for £304 million to provide PPE. Uniserv says everything it supplied was certified and approved by the Department of Health, but for reasons unknown, more than half of this was later categorised as not for use in the NHS.
That makes it one of the worst cases in the VIP lane.
According to leaked spreadsheets, the company charged 87p for face masks, compared to an average of 24p charged in the previous 2 weeks by other companies, suggesting a difference of £48 million across the contract. Uniserv say prices were changing daily. Their price included customs costs and urgent delivery to the UK, and is not comparable to other prices in the leaked spreadsheets. The government then went on to pay Uniserv another £500 million to store PPE. In all, Uniserv made operating profits of £297 million over the pandemic, up from just £6 million pre-COVID. But they say the majority of revenue came from shipping, not PPE, and that its margin was lower than other companies operating from Asia. By January 2023, the government had spent over £1 billion storing surplus PPE.
Cost per day, it's about £700,000 a day that we're currently paying per day. Yes, correct. Which is why we are writing off the stock and effectively disposing it. So we tried to donate as much of it as possible for people who want it, and we've got to bite the bullet on the rest and say, you know what, it's no longer required, and so we are disposing it as rapidly as possible.
The favoured method of disposal was incineration.
We're talking about probably the biggest misspending scandal in the UK of all time, billions of pounds of public money wasted and literally going up in smoke. At one point, we were seeing 500 lorry loads of unusable or wasted PPE being burnt a month, and that just seems an insane waste of public money.
By the end of 2024, over 1 million pallets of PPE had been disposed of, enough to stretch from Land's End to John O'Groats. Taxpayers spent over £8 billion buying this surplus stock, enough to employ over 200,000 nurses.
One of the biggest frustrations in that role was just seeing that we were wasting so much money. Money that could have been used on operations, money that could have been spent in the NHS.
It didn't have to be this way. No other country introduced a VIP lane. No other country procured so much PPE, and subsequently no other country had as much waste as we did.
So what's happened to those who benefited from all this waste and the politicians responsible for overseeing it? In December 2020, Good Law Project started a legal action against the Department of Health over the PPE high priority lane.
After a very long fight in the High Court concluded that the VIP lane was unlawful.
The case focused on contracts for two companies, Pestfix and Ianda. The judge said the Department of Health did not rely on their high priority status when awarding the contracts. Both were rightly prioritised, would very likely have won contracts anyway, and the due diligence was acceptable under the circumstances. But the court also said the secret high priority lane was in breach of the obligation of equal treatment, and as such, unlawful.
Given the VIP lane was ruled to be illegal, why are there no consequences for that?
Over 100 companies benefited from the two VIP lanes. But until now, the only company to get significant attention has been PPE MedPro and Michelle Mone.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I wasn't trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes, and I regret and I'm sorry for not saying straight out, yes, I am involved.
The government is suing the company for $122 million for the unusable gowns it says they provided. They deny any wrongdoing.
To me, it's pretty obvious that Michelle Mone is a convenient scapegoat. She's a working class woman from Glasgow. She's not Conservative Party royalty. Everybody likes putting her photo on the front page of their newspapers. But what she did, although bad, was certainly no worse than anyone else's. I think she's become the poster child, a convenient distraction, if you like, for the real wrongdoing here, which was by members of the kind of Conservative Party royalty.
There are actually quite a few Baroness Mones out there who should be given the once-over.
PPE MedPro is being investigated for fraud, and a number of other unnamed PPE suppliers are being investigated by HMRC. But there have been no criminal charges. The government has also been trying to get some money back from other companies.
Several of the contracts are now matters of dispute between the government and the supplier.
But it's all very behind closed doors, so we don't really know what progress they are making about getting money back.
The Department of Health did file a claim for £135 million against Primer Design, saying many of the COVID test kits they supplied were defective, which Primer disputed. But on the day it came to court, a settlement was announced, with Primer Design's parent company paying the Department of Health just £5 million and not admitting any fault. And pest control company Pestfix, that was given contracts for £344 million, has repaid £71 million for faulty masks and gowns. But in other cases, there seems little chance any money will be recovered. The government wants to get £24 million back from Lord Chadlington's introduction, SG Recruitment, for unusable gowns. But there's a problem.
The company's gone bust now, and the holding company, SG Holdings, that's gone into liquidation as well in Jersey. So both companies have gone into liquidation. The government says it's in dispute over the PPE deals, but there isn't really a company to be in dispute with anymore. So you have to assume we're not going to get our money back.
The liquidators have since reported that SG Recruitment, under a new name and owner, went bust, owing over £1 million in tax. They have so far recovered a total of £5 and believe some of the funds were transferred from the company to unknown third parties, but the company says they were payments to suppliers. 3 years on from the end of the pandemic, nearly all the VIP companies and their owners have kept the money where there were issues with the deal.
There's been no accountability. They've ridden off into the sunset with their tens of millions, living very lavish lifestyles on the back of a pandemic.
I think it's sickening how these people have made so much money. And it's the taxpayer at the end of the day that's going to have to foot this bill.
The Labour government has appointed a COVID counter-fraud commissioner, Tom Hayhoe. But critics say he and his team have neither the power nor the resources to properly investigate.
It's a part-time role on 3 days a week. There are 130 high-risk contracts with lots of red flags that need to be looked at. That's effectively him looking at one of those each day for his short term in office. That's a really weak and weedy and substandard response.
I just don't see how they're going to get to anything like the truth with the resources that they have.
Apart from Michelle Mone, very few of the politicians associated with the VIP lanes or the financial waste have faced any consequences.
The people who we should be going after are the politicians who allowed all of this to happen.
We are going to fulfill our fundamental project of uniting and levelling up across the whole country.
For the most part, politicians have not really had to face any accountability for their role in this.
Owen Paterson resigned as an MP after being censured for paid advocacy for Randox and another company before the pandemic, even though he was backed by the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He criticised the investigation into him and says he did not lobby anyone and he acted in the interests of public health and safety. Former Tory MP Brooks Newmark and a consultancy firm led by Lord Feldman were investigated but were found not to have breached any parliamentary or lobbying rules. Lord Chadlington was cleared of lobbying and twice of breaching parliamentary standards and is now being investigated by the Lords Commissioner for Standards for the third time. Liam Fox, through whom Shorescreen Diagnostics was referred to the VIP lane, declared a £20,000 donation from Shorescreen in July 2022. The company said the money was donated to Dr. Fox's office to support a series of educational events and was not connected to lobbying. Lord Agnew resigned from government in protest at the failure to effectively recoup around £5 billion lost to fraudulent applications for COVID business loans.
The Treasury appear to have no knowledge or little interest in the consequences of fraud to our economy or society. Total fraud loss across government is estimated at £29 billion a year. Of course, not all can be stopped, but a combination of arrogance, indolence and ignorance freezes the government machine.
For tens of millions of Britons, the tax burden is now at record levels, in part as a result of the billions unnecessarily wasted during the pandemic.
We could have had more services, more doctors, more nurses, so it's the whole country that's suffering, while these people from the VIPs are sitting pretty with all that money.
Keir Starmer said he would ban VIP lanes for future procurement while in opposition, but has so far failed to commit to such a ban. Now Labour is in power.
The COVID inquiry will deliver, I expect, some lessons to learn. But it's not about punishing wrongdoers. It doesn't even have that aspiration, and it certainly won't deliver that consequence.
So those decisions over the issuance of contracts were matters for officials, not for politicians.
My total focus was to save as many lives as possible. We're primarily talking about PPE, but right across the board. We had to get as much in as we could. In some cases, we paid expensive prices for that, but I think that was worth it to save lives. And in the end, on PPE, we over-succeeded, right? We procured more than was needed and had to, I'm sure we'll come to dealing with the oversupply that we had at the end.
We will.
The bottom line is this, that it is very, very hard in the UK to hold senior level people to account.
They were very, very difficult decisions. At the time, I felt, and I know that everybody else felt, that we were doing our best in very difficult circumstances to protect life and protect the NHS.
And meanwhile, there are the families of ordinary NHS staff, nurses, doctors, porters, who died in COVID of the virus they caught at work, perhaps because they were supplied with shoddy PPE.
I've come to think that it reflects a kind of basic truth that in Britain, privileged people get privileged access all the way through, all the time, and this was just a particularly egregious example of it.